Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever found yourself looking at a new picture and feeling like you've seen it before, even though you swear you haven't? Today we're diving into a fascinating study about why our brains sometimes play tricks on us, creating false memories. Imagine looking at a beautiful waterfall or a herd of zebras, and getting this strange feeling of familiarity, like you've been there or seen that exact scene many times before. Even if it is your very first time, this is called a false alarm in the world of memory, and it is surprisingly common. For a long time, scientists thought this was just a random mistake, like static in our memory system. But what if certain images are just naturally better at tricking our brains? That is the big question this research tackles, and they've built a special tool to help us find out. So, what is the problem they're trying to solve? Well, when we try to remember things, we can either correctly recall something we've seen before, or we can mistakenly think a new thing is something we've already encountered. This second part, thinking a new thing is familiar, is what this paper is all about. It is called a false alarm, and it is a key part of understanding how our memory can be biased. Scientists know that some images seem to cause these false alarms more often than others, and people tend to get tricked by the same images. This suggests it is not just about the person, but about the image itself. To understand this, researchers often use something called signal detection theory. Think of it like trying to find a specific radio station. You have a signal, the memory, and a dial you turn to tune it in your decision criteria. Sometimes the static can be so strong that you think you hear the station when it is not really there. That is like a false alarm. But traditional signal detection theory usually looks at the person's overall tendency to tune their dial liberally or conservatively. It doesn't explain why specific images are more likely to cause that false alarm feeling. What is cool here is that this new research says, hold on, it is not just the person's dial settings, it is also the broadcast quality of the image itself. They point out that when lots of people make the same memory mistake about a particular image, like during the famous Mandela effect phenomenon, where many people remember things differently than they actually happened, it is strong evidence that the image itself has some property that makes us misremember. These aren't just random errors, they seem to be predictable by the image. This is where the main innovation comes in. Instead of just looking at how well people remember things correctly, this study created a special computer program, a neural network to predict how often an image will cause a false alarm. They named it FalseResMem. Think of it as a false memory predictor for images. So how did they build this predictor? They used a big data set of images called Memcat, which has thousands of pictures, and importantly, it already has scores showing how likely each image is to cause a false memory based on how many people remembered it incorrectly. They trained their FalseResMem model on this data. The model is pretty clever. It uses two parts. One part is already excellent at understanding general image features from a huge database called ImageNet, and the other part is a special network trained from scratch to focus specifically on what makes an image likely to cause a false memory. The results were pretty impressive. When they tested FalseResMem, it could predict the likelihood of a false alarm for new images with a decent accuracy. They used a measure called Spearman's rank correlation, and it came out around 0.48 on average, meaning it was doing a good job of ordering images from least to most likely to cause a false memory. The best it achieved was even higher at 0.58. This is significant because that is pretty close to how consistent humans are themselves at predicting false alarms for these images, setting a kind of human ceiling for what is possible. This is where it gets really interesting. The researchers looked inside FalseResMem to see why it was making its predictions, what image features were making it think an image would cause a false memory. They found that images with high false alarm rates often shared certain visual characteristics. For example, images like serene waterfalls or distinct zebra patterns often had high predicted false alarm rates. These are images that can feel familiar, perhaps, because they have a neutral appearance or repetitive visual elements like stripes. The model found that these types of images, which they call deceptively familiar, were more likely to trigger a false memory. On the flip side, images that were less likely to cause false alarms were often more complex, with unexpected or unusual elements. Think of an animal in a really strange context. These kinds of images seem to grab our attention more and signal novelty, making us less likely to mistake them for something familiar. But does this model only work for pretty nature pictures? The researchers tested FalseResMem on a bunch of different types of images, not just the ones it was trained on. They threw in scenes, art, faces, and even symbols. And guess what? It held up pretty well. It could still make meaningful predictions for scenes and objects, showing that the features it learned are useful across different kinds of everyday images. It even showed some ability to predict false alarms for conventional symbols, which is quite remarkable given how different they are from photographs. However, it wasn't perfect everywhere. It struggled with specially designed symbols intended to be memorable or forgettable, and its performance on art images and food images was weaker. This suggests that while the model captures general patterns that lead to false memories, some specific domains might have unique features that it doesn't quite grasp yet. So, what does all this mean? This research is a big step forward because it shows we can actually predict image-level false memories. It moves us away from thinking of false alarms as just random noise and treats them as a predictable signal driven by the image itself. This confirms the idea that some images are just more prone to messing with our memory than others. And it is consistent across many people. This could explain why whole groups of people might share the same false memory about something. The fact that the model is sensitive to things like contrast and simple patterns in the images is super interesting. It suggests that these basic visual elements, when they're configured in a certain way, can create a feeling of familiarity even if the memory isn't accurate. It is like our brains get a general sense of "I've seen something like this," without needing specific details. This research is really important because it gives us a new tool. Now, researchers can use FalseResMem to screen images before experiments, making sure they're not accidentally creating false memories when they don't want to, or strategically using images that are likely to cause them. This could be huge for fields like eyewitness testimony, where false memories can have serious consequences. They've even made this tool readily available to other researchers, which is awesome. This means instead of just studying accurate memories, we can now deeply investigate the very nature of memory errors themselves. Now, no study is perfect. While FalseResMem is impressive, it is not a mind reader. Its performance dipped for very specialized categories like art and food, and it struggled with engineered symbols. This means it is best at predicting false memories for natural, everyday images. It doesn't capture all the nuances of human memory, especially when it comes to complex artistic interpretations or very specific domain knowledge. Also, the study was based on a specific dataset, MemCat, so replicating these findings with even more diverse data would be beneficial. So what is my take on this? I think this is a groundbreaking application of AI to understand a really fundamental aspect of human cognition, our fallibility by creating a tool that can predict false memories. These researchers have opened up a whole new avenue for investigation. It is like having a magnifying glass specifically for memory errors. This could lead to more reliable eyewitness accounts, better educational materials, and even help us understand certain mental health conditions where false memories play a role. The next steps could involve refining FalseResMem to be even more accurate across different image types, or perhaps exploring how factors like emotion or context, which were not part of this study's focus, might interact with the image features that FalseResMem identifies. Imagine being able to design advertisements or even virtual reality experiences that intentionally avoid triggering false memories, or conversely, using them to test people's memory resilience. This research is a fantastic reminder that our memories aren't perfect recordings. They're dynamic constructions that can be influenced by subtle cues in the world around us. And with tools like FalseResMem, we're getting closer than ever to understanding, and maybe even controlling these fascinating quirks of the human mind. If you found this as mind-bending as I did, be sure to hit that like button. Leave a comment below with your thoughts on false memories, and subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more deep dives into the science of you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.